All right, today is Wednesday the 17th. I'm not sure where half the class is, but they're not here, but I'm going anyway. So you can go out to the P drive for the class if you want, and you may want to copy over both the 0217 2016 and the 0222 16 folders over to either your virtual desktop or your regular desktop, wherever you want to. Okay, so I'll give you a second to do that. If there's time today, we're going to go over chapters 9, 10, and 11. We should be able to get through chapter 9 by the break, and chapters 10 and 11 are both fairly short. All right. And if we get through all of that, then we will start creating our game in the next class period. All right. And when you look over here, just so you can see, again, in these three chapters, in chapters 9, 10, and 11, there are a series of tables. So in the 917, there are about 60 examples right here that I took from jQuery.com or from W3 Schools or someplace else. All right, but between these four tables that are here, you'll see this one. Notice there's a bunch of them. And then here's another one with a few of them, and here's another one with a bunch of them, etc. So that's what's in 217. And then in 222 are the ones for chapters 10 and 11. Again, there's a total of approximately maybe 120 different examples that are in here. All right. And rather than taking the time to go over all these examples, what I did was I put them out there. And I would strongly suggest that you just open one of them, mouse events. All right, probably a crummy example, but screen X, screen Y. To display the mouse coordinates, click anywhere on the page. Well, that's pretty obvious what just happened right there. All right, but if you look at the underlying code, of course, I can't right mouse click to show it to you because it's going to run that thing. But if you look at the underlying code here, they're not big examples. They all look about like this. So what I did was I put the URL that I used to grab the example, a description, and then gave you the example. All right. I think that's how you learn, is to just sit there and play around with this stuff. So jumping back in then into our book, chapter 9 starts on page 235. So again, I know we did this before, but we've now gone through these first 6 chapters. All right, that was section 1, so we went through that already. We're in the middle of section 2, and ideally, hopefully today, we'll finish section 2. So the first chapter we'll have is applying JavaScript and jQuery events for richly interactive web pages, then dynamically accessing and manipulating web pages with JavaScript and jQuery, and then working with window browser and other non-page elements, especially the end of chapter 11. You've had that stuff already, because what they explain at the end of chapter 11 is, what is a prompt box? What is a confirm box? What is an alert? All right, that's about the last half of chapter 11. So I'm going to do basically nothing on that because you should have gone over it last semester. I know if you had me for the JavaScript class, you should have, and everyone should have at least some experience using those. We'll look at it, and there are examples both in the ones that I created for you or stole off the net, whatever you want to say, and in the book itself. All right, so again, ideally we're going to get through this today, which means next week we're going to spend all next week on that game, and then the following week we're going to go into these chapters. This is just almost straight jQuery. 12, 13, 14, and 15, and 16, 17, 18, and 19. That's almost all just straight jQuery. And by the time we get done with that stuff, you're going to know as much jQuery as I can ram down your throats in a semester. And you will have experience because you will be incorporating jQuery into the BTC Uber website. On the main page, you're going to have a slideshow on there. All right? And it should be a professional looking slideshow. You will be adding animation to the site, and we're going to go over how to do all that stuff. All right. I may or may not have mentioned this to you before. I probably didn't. And it'll probably take me too long to find it, but I'm going to put this in here anyway. There's a guy named Jeffrey Way, first name, but that's it. And if you go out there, you don't have to do this, but he's got this thing, and this is actually a really nice course, and it's free. It's called 30 Days to Learn jQuery. So if you just Google Jeffrey Way jQuery, he's got all this stuff that's in here. Notice it says free. You might have to look a while, but the whole thing is free. All right, and I've gone through virtually all of it that's in here. Some of it's real simplistic. Some of it you're going to be like, whoa, it's going to make your head swim. But most of the lessons, I think the longest one is around a half an hour long. But he goes through a lot of the stuff that's in jQuery. And like I said, it's free. All right. So let's jump into then Chapter 9. Again, page 235 in your book. You can see when you look here, we've got about 6 or 7 different objectives. This chapter is on event handling, all right? And it's a good chapter because whether you realize it or not, I'm sure that you are to the point in the C# class where you're creating simple programs, and probably those programs have a calculate button on them. They may have an exit button on them. They may have a clear button on them, etc. All right? And buttons are examples. When you double click that button, what comes up? The code window for that click event. All right? Because jQuery and JavaScript, like C#, like Java, like most programming languages, they're event handling languages. So you can imagine that the system is just sitting there waiting to do something. And it can do something based on events that you create, like clicking a button. Whether you realize it or not, if you had a text box, text field, whatever it's called in the language you're using, but if I add a text box and I put my name in there, all right, my full first name, Jeffrey, what that did was that actually initiated 7 different events into that text box. And it has to do that because I can set up that text box. For instance, if I asked for a salary, all right, and it had to be numeric, that if I tried putting my name in there, even though I could literally at the keyboard type in Jeffrey, I could set it up so the text box accepted none of that because it would only accept numbers, all right? Now, so imagine that the program is just sitting there waiting for you to do something so it can react. Those are the things it'll typically react to, but it can react to other things also. You can set timers so that every 5 minutes you're prompted for something or whatever. I mentioned to the class yesterday that in the, quote, olden days, like back in the 90s, when you really didn't have Word, it was Word Perfect, all right? And back at that time, stuff was a lot more antiquated than it is today. And what you'd see by default, unless you changed it, is every 15 minutes, you'd see a little message at the bottom of your screen that would say WordPerfect has auto-saved your file for you. All right, that was time dependent. That was an event that happened, but it wasn't based on you, it was based on time. All right, so again, most events that the system responds to are because of something you did. But the system will only respond to that event if you put some code in there to make it respond. For instance, in your C# class, I see some heads were shaking when I said that. So you probably, if you've got something simple, a text box with a first number, a text box that you put in a second number, you click the calculate button, then in a label or another text box, you show the answer. All right, when you add the 2 types of things. Well, you know this, you have to put some code in that click event. Because if you create a button and you put no code in it, and you run the program, you can click it and it looks like it's pressed in, but it doesn't do anything. In much the same way, if you put that code, if you're kind of a sinister person or in some way sort of a sick person, you may or may not know it, but not only is there a click event, there's a double click event. You want to drive a person nuts, create that for them and put the code in the double click event and don't tell them that. Because they'll keep clicking and eventually they'll accidentally double click. And then it'll work and they'll wonder what the hell they did to make it work when it wasn't working before. Because I've seen people do this, all right? But again, you typically, these controls have events that are associated with them that are default events. All right. So they talk about a lot of that stuff in here. So what we learned in here, and this isn't a pretty chapter. This isn't a fun chapter. All right. But they say how you can basically add handlers that dynamically respond to events, because once you can start to harness event handling, all right, the author says you can make spectacularly rich and incredibly sophisticated web pages, but the idea is it's even easier to bring interactivity, all right, into a website. And once you get that, then not only are you going to bring people to your site, but you're going to get them to want to come back. All right, and that's the key thing. All right, so they go through the event process, and let's just look at this picture here. The picture is shown in your book on page 237, and on 236, they go through the 5 steps that get involved with this. First, it says some kind of a physical event happens. So imagine that you literally have, you've created an HTML form, and it's got a button on it that says submit. And you filled in the form, and you click the submit button. So that's a physical event that's happened. Step 2, events are triggered in the browser. So as it says, the user instruction results in events being triggered by the web browser. And often, many things will happen at the same time. Step 3, the browser creates an object for the event. It actually creates an object for each event that gets triggered. Step 4, user event handlers are called. And if you look up on the picture here, they show you the difference between a couple different concepts that are known as capturing and bubbling. All right, and look at it this way. Do you start at the top and work your way down, or do you start at the bottom and work your way up? So if we had a really simple, and I'll make this simple, all right, I'm not going to create a whole web page for you, but let's just put a few things in here. I don't care about, there'll be a head in here, but we won't put anything in the head section. All right, I'll just literally leave it blank. All right, and we'll come in here and we'll put in a body. And then in the body, I'm going to put a paragraph tag in here. And, there'll be something else in here, but let's say that I've got an unordered list in here. And you say, well, I would never put an unordered list in a let's just pretend we did it. All right, and we put a list item in here. And maybe we have, a few of these. All right, then we come in here and we end our unordered list. And we come down here, we end our paragraph. Again, there might be other stuff in here. That's really not important, but there's a reason that I'm showing you this. All right, if I want to put some code in here, and I want that code to react on one or more of these list items, okay? These list items are children of the unordered list. The unordered list is a child of the paragraph. The paragraph is a child of the body. The body is a child of the HTML, all right? And you probably, maybe never thought of it that way, but that's how it is. So the reason I'm showing that to you is looking at the picture that we just had right here. If you decide you want to go through and use the capturing mechanism, what that says is you start at the HTML level and you see if there's any code there to handle it. If you don't find it, you jump down to the body. If you don't find it there, you jump down to the P tag. If you don't find it there, you jump down to the UL tag. If you don't find it there, you jump down to the LI tag. So you're going from top to bottom. That's capturing. So you capture down, but you bubble up. So when you're bubbling, you're starting at the list item. And if you don't find the code there, then you work your way up to the UL. If you don't find it there, you work your way up to the P, up to the body, and up to the HTML. So that's the difference between capturing and bubbling. And you might say, well, that's fine, but I still don't really get it. Well, if you do go out here, one of the things that I put out here was an article from that javascript.info site, and it's called, appropriately enough, Capturing and Bubbling. And it's a very long article that explains it, shows it with pictures, shows it with examples. All right? There are some really cool examples. I didn't cite any, but there are some that are online that'll show you capturing and bubbling, and they'll show it to you basically in a 3D type of look, where it's coming like this or it's going like this type of thing. All right. So the capturing and the bubbling is shown there in step 4. There's also a target. As it says, the target phase occurs when the event in the HTML element where it was initially triggered. Finally, the browser handlers are called. All right, the browser has some default handlers that we'll call to do things by default, such as you put a hyperlink on a page. By default, when you click it, it attempts to resolve whatever's in your href and send you out to that address. All right, it attempts to do that by default. You can circumvent that if you want to. In other words, you can tell it, no, I don't want you to go there. You can click on it, but I don't want you to do anything. We'll talk about how to do that in this chapter. All right. So they start talking next about event objects. Okay? And it says they're looking at event objects on the bottom of 237. Notice, the event object provides you with additional information about the event. For instance, a click or key press, which key was pressed, etc. So you can get as granular with this stuff as you want to. All right? And what do I mean? It's exactly what I told you before. What you might do is you might say, okay, check, I've got a text box. That text box is supposed to be numeric only. You know that one way that you can do that is you can put numeric in HTML5, but not all browsers support HTML5. All right? So if you put it in with JavaScript, you can check on each keystroke, and you can check the key that was hit. And if it falls where it's a numeric key, you can allow it to go through, and otherwise, you can keep it from happening. That's the kind of stuff that they're talking about in here. So they show you in this chart that's on pages 238 and 239, and again, there's 21, or I guess the one on 238, there's 21 different items here. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's the ones that you'd be working with most often. Some of the stuff that's in here, you can take a look at it, and it should make sense. Just taking a look at for Alt key, for example. It's true if you press the Alt key. It's false if you didn't press the Alt key. All right? Buttons. All right? And there's other stuff that's in here also. You can just take a look. Which ones will you use? It depends on what you're doing and what you're trying to do with it. What you're going to see, if you actually took the time and ran every example that I put in there, some of them are very duplicative. All right? In other words, they'll show you 2 or 3 ways of doing the same thing. All right? So, those, as it says, these are the attributes that you're working with, okay? These are the methods that are associated with those attributes. This is the one I already mentioned to you. If you choose, for example, prevent default, you can have a natural or a default action of an event, you can cancel it. Quite often you do that. What you might want to do is you have an HTML form. Okay, you click a submit button. And it used to be the way that most people programmed is they would check and they would validate everything on the client side, because when you click that submit button, what's it typically going to do? There's going to be an action element that's going to push you off to another page, right? Well, it will check it first on the client side, and if there's any errors, it'll call prevent default, because it doesn't want you to leave the page that you're on. All right. And some of the other stuff that's in here. We talked a little bit about propagation, stuff propagating its way up and propagating its way down. We'll look at it a little bit when we come in and look at a couple of the examples that are in the chapter. But notice, stop propagation and stop immediate propagation. All right? What's going to happen typically is when the browser, to handle an event, it might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever number of things that it wants to do in a row. So it kind of queues them up, all right? And if you call stop propagation, it'll typically try to wind that queue down. So it'll try to do as many things as it can that's in the queue, whether it should or not. But if you want to immediately stop it, that's the difference between the stop propagation and the stop immediate propagation, in a nutshell, all right? Different events that you can work with. This is the next chart that's shown here on page 240 and 241. 26 different events. Some of them, whether you realize it or not, you're already familiar with. All right? Blur. Remember that if you are in an HTML form, and if I've got, let's say it's real simple, it's got my first name and my last name in it. I'm in my first name. Now I put in JEFF and I hit the tab key, which moves me to my last name. And two things happen there. A blur event takes place because I'm going from one control to the other, and a focus event takes place. All right, because I now have focus on the second element. Again, I can put code in there so that, let's say I left it blank. All right, so I put nothing in the first name and I just tabbed and went to the second name. I can put a blur in there and I can check and say, wow, if there was nothing in there, prevent the default from happening. Don't allow me to tab. Keep me in that particular first text field until I put something that's in it. All right, and there's a bunch of other ones. I mean, you can set up a click handler or a double click handler. You can set up key down. You can set up key press and key out. All right. Mouse over. There's like about 6 or 7 different mouse events. And you probably know this kind of thing, that when you start moving your mouse around, different things happen. All right. For instance, in the past, I just want to kind of show you one of the big differences between using JavaScript and using jQuery. And I can show you it right now. jQuery still supports mouse over and mouse out. So if I take my mouse and let's say, for example, I've got a text box on the page. And I take my mouse and I mouse over that text box. Maybe it may be the one to show that it's active. Maybe instead of having black text on a white background, it now has white text on a black background. Make sense? Then when I mouse over, it does that. When I mouse out, it goes back to the default. Does that make sense? And you can still do that in JavaScript or in jQuery. But what they suggest you use in jQuery is the hover event, because it does the same thing without you having to write 2 different things. All right? Sometimes you'll still use it, and we're going to look at examples of that as we go on in here. All right. Then this is the fun stuff, and I say that kind of sarcastically. All right? Using the page load events for initialization, and they show 2 different ways, okay, that you can basically set up initialization. One is right here. Body onload equals onload handler. As it says, you have 2 options to cause this to trigger when the page is fully loaded. And that is not supposed to be called until the page is totally loaded. You might say, well, who cares? Even if you've got very intricate images on the page, they should be totally loaded before that gets called. All right? So one way you can do it is like this. Another way, as they say, is you can assign it directly to the window object. And we'll look at the window object a little bit more later. But you can do that in your JavaScript code. This is in your HTML. This would be within script tags. All right? But it works the same way. So is there an advantage of one over the other? Well, most people will tell you that they would use the second way, because otherwise what you're doing is you're putting code, a call to a function, inside of an HTML file, which isn't really, the recommended way of doing things. That said, do people still do it? Of course they do. All right. So then they mentioned, as far as adding some initialization code, these that they're showing here, both of these, that's jQuery. Anytime something starts with a $sign like that, that's a jQuery call. So this is saying when the document's ready, you want to call this function. When the window has loaded, you call this function. All right. Not only can you add handlers, you can remove handlers. Now when you look at this, whether you realize it or not, this shows that what jQuery is it's a JavaScript library, because it uses JavaScript syntax. The word function followed by the name of your function, followed by parens, which may or may not have something inside. The whole thing's in curly braces. All right? What this says is go throughout your go throughout your web page and replace every paragraph that's in there with the word clicked. I have no idea why you'd want to do that, but you could do that. That's how simple it is to do that. Well, let's say that I only wanted to do the first paragraph. Then I can specify in there that I want just the first paragraph. Or if I only want a paragraph with a certain ID in it, okay, then instead of having this, all right, I would have P followed by a pound sign followed by that, or just, if that was the only ID on the page, just pound sign followed by that. So there's a lot of ways you can do this. You may, depending on how much you've gotten into web page design, you may have used the inner HTML command. You may have used that before, which allows you to take and add text to a web page, or modify text that's on a web page, or really, if you know what you're doing, even remove text from a web page. Well, the inner HTML, it's not advised that you use that in jQuery. You use the HTML method instead, and that's what they're showing right there, is a call to the HTML method. All right. So most of the examples that he gives here, for lack of better words, are at least kind of convoluted. All right, it says the following example shows how easy it is to add a click handler in here. So what it says is div on click equal click handler, click here. So this would call the following function when the div element is clicked. So again, what that's going to do is when you click that div that currently says click here, when you click on it, that will cause this to be run, and this to be run will change that from clicked here to clicked. Again, like I said, the example itself is kind of stupid, but it's the idea, what they're trying to show you here, that makes more sense. They've got a little better example down below here. When they say you can also come in here and you can add, you can come in and basically add parameters here. Because in this example, what they're showing you, it says we can call when the div element is clicked, and change the text to display the X coordinate of the mouse. All right, so not only is it going to do that for you, but it's going to tell you where you were on the X-axis when you did it. And as you'd guess, all you'd have to do would be to say, to add to this plus, and you could say, click that Y position, and then plus E.ScreenX if you wanted your coordinates. Now, is that going to matter in here? No, but if you're working on a game where it's important to figure out where somebody is on the screen, you're going to use screen X and screen Y conceivably all over the place. All right. Now it says what they showed previously, all this stuff was adding event handlers, and they were adding the event handlers inside of the HTML. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. But what you miss doing it in the HTML is the dynamicity. You're not able to do things really dynamically. All right, you're saying, hey, after it's loaded, do this type of thing. If you want to be more dynamic, you have to either put it in JavaScript code or in jQuery code. So that's what they show next here. This adding event handlers in JavaScript. Try to keep up here. So this is page 244 in the book. And again, what they're going to do is they're going to show you how to do this in JavaScript. And then there'll be an exercise. Then they'll show you how to do it in jQuery. And guess what they do? They put the same darn exercise in as the JavaScript one, but instead of running it and writing it in JavaScript, they write it in jQuery. All right, so you can start to see the differences between the two. All right, and I was talking to yesterday, the second year people, and you probably get this already, but I want to make sure you do. All right, because there's at least one person in this class, that asked me, they said, you know, I understand the assignment, I understand what we're supposed to be doing, etc. I'm a little bit perplexed, for lack of better words, that why do we have 3 different forms when they're all the same form? And the answer to that is, when you go out, if you're going to be a web developer, you're going to find that all 3 are used. All right, there are going to be people out there that maybe they don't know a lot of code, but they figured out HTML5 and they put in all the form validation with HTML5, which is fine, unless people with very old browsers are using it, because then the stuff's not really going to work, or not work as you want it to. You're also going to find that many people, there are literally millions of lines of code out there that are doing the same kind of thing with just JavaScript. But now, more often than not, people are recommending that as you validate a form or do this or do that, you use jQuery, because it typically results in less code. They've done studies on this. Sometimes the resulting code that you get from JavaScript versus jQuery, there's a 10-fold decrease. So you're writing 10% as much code to do the same thing. All right. And if you told me that I have my choice, that my job in life is going to either to maintain these 1,000 lines of code, all right, or maintain 100 lines of code, I'll pick the 100. All right, I can do a better job because I've got less to do, so I can concentrate more on it. All right, but they're all still out there. None of them are going away. So as it says here, with JavaScript, it provides the advantage that you can dynamically add event handlers at any point in time, not just when the page is loaded. All right, and there's more work involved in doing this. As it says, to add an event, you call add event listener on the DOM object, and they will show you some examples in here. All right, and you have to be able to start looking at this code, and ideally at least, it's going to make some sense to you. So you've got this thing called click handler. This E that's in here, that's the event that caused this to happen. This object ID is whatever it is you passed in. All right. This, like I said, it's called num, and this is called message. Well, the reason I'm showing you that is what they do here is this. This is the next example in here. This is done with straight JavaScript. Okay. And if you click here, it'll say, I believe it says div1 says yes at X position, and it shows you where it is. And if you click here, it says div2 says no at this position. So it's showing you where you are on the screen. But the point is, it's doing it dynamically as the program's running. So rather than putting it into a body or into a window.onload event, they're sitting there and they're putting it, well, they've got an onload handler that's going to end up being called in here once it loads. All right. And when you look at it, again, the example, like I said, is just kind of dumb. Because why would you do this? I don't know. But I mean, the author, I'm sure, had his reasons for doing it. But I thought I opened it, but I guess I didn't. That's not the one. And it's adding to this, I believe. I don't remember exactly what it's doing. The point is, it's coming through there and it's figuring out this stuff, all right, while the program's running. So he, like I said, he goes through the same example, the same one he just showed here. After he does it, he says, now let's do it in jQuery. And when you look, it's the same darn example. All right, but he does it in jQuery instead of in JavaScript. There's nothing wrong. You can write some of your stuff in HTML, some of your stuff in jQuery, some of your stuff in JavaScript. And you're going to find that a lot of people do that. All right, because even though you typically write less code with jQuery, to many people it's more complex. They'd rather write more code and have it make more sense to them than write less code where it's confusing to them. So the author says here, and again, this is an author speaking, the best method is to use jQuery. Using jQuery makes it simple to select different sets of objects and apply the same event handler to all or most of them. That's an important sentence. Because if you remember, one of the things that we talked about in the last chapter, you may or may not remember, but towards the end of the chapter, we talked about two different methods that you can use to iterate your way through different things that are in the DOM. One was called each, and one was called map. All right, and if you take a look here, this is basically, they're telling you how to do the same type of thing, and they're using an event map to go through it. All right, now in an example that's as small as this, if you look in here, there's not going to be much less code. What do we have? 12 lines here. 16? All right. So you say, well, that didn't save us much. Actually, when you think about it, it did. It's 25% less. Not only that, technically, this is not 12 lines of code. You literally could have taken all this stuff, and where you've got the div here, that could have been one line. This could have been one line. So you really could have cut it down to about 6 or 7 lines of code, which would have knocked it down by over 50%. All right, you can use add event listener just like you do with JavaScript. You can use it in jQuery, but there's other ways that you can do it in jQuery also. If there's a problem with this language It's that they give you sometimes so darn many ways to do the same thing. You know, and I've had people say that to me, well, which one should I use? And it's the smorgasbord type of an idea. You know, you go to an old country buffet. Geez, I want to try everything. Well, maybe the first time you go there, you do that. And you find the things that you like the most, and when you go back the next time, you pig out on those. All right? It's kind of the same way in here. You should try doing different things in different ways to see which one makes the most sense to you. And even that, what makes the most sense to me and what makes the most sense to you might be two totally different things. All right, so what we're saying here is we're adding an event listener. So we're saying when the mouse enters, whatever this object is, run this function. When the mouse leaves that same object, call this function. And you can have them do anything you want them to do. All right. Both JavaScript and jQuery, as they mentioned here, allow you to trigger events manually. And whether you realize it or not, you've kind of at least, done stuff like this already. This is the bottom of 253. Okay? And it says it provides advantages. Basically what it allows you to do is write your own custom events and tie your code to those custom events. All right? Because sometimes something is going to happen and you look through everything that's available to you in JavaScript or in jQuery and there's no method like that. So you have to write your own. So as they mentioned, for doing it in JavaScript, the simplest way to trigger it is to use the event method attached to the DOM if there is one. So again, the name of your object, .click. And you could put in here whatever. We're used to taking in those parentheses, putting in things like a number or a letter or a string. But remember that in JavaScript, like in jQuery, what you can put in there as a parameter is a function call. And that function, you can have it do whatever it is you want it to do, including call other functions. And you can even write it so that you can write multiple functions inside of there. What they do in this example, that's the first one I brought up accidentally, is they come in here and they make these things look like buttons. All right, and I can click the I'm available button, and if I click it and click it again, that'll take this and it'll turn the checkbox on and it'll turn it off. Okay, and here's an all week one. And you might look at that and go, big deal. I mean, why would you even want to do this? I can think right now of somebody who might like this. All right, unless you worked with checkboxes and made that text really big and the checkbox is really big, sometimes senior citizens, it's very hard for them to look at checkboxes and figure out what's going on. I've watched my mother on her computer, and she's got a 22-inch monitor, and she still is like this, and she's got her nose in the machine, or in the monitor rather, and she still can't see what's happening. So this would be an example. So what we've done is we've taken these things here. I don't even think they're buttons. They could have been. I don't remember. But I thought they made them like as spans to make them look like buttons. And you've set it up. You've set handlers up so when you click it, you can either click here or you can click here. All right? And either one of them will work. And again, when you look at it, there's really not much code in there doing this. All right? To say that you can do something like that with 20 lines of code, all right, it's fairly phenomenal. So you can do it using JavaScript. You can use it using jQuery. All right? So this says, again, you got to understand this. This line right here in the blue, that line is what that's going to do is it's going to trigger a click event for every span that's on a page. That's typically, again, by putting a selector in there like span or div or whatever, that's not usually what you're going to want to do. All right? That's why you use IDs and that's why you use classes. All right? So there's only select ones, one or ones that you want something to happen with. So they show some examples of this here. And the author says here, following is an example of using the first method to trigger a click event for all elements, all right, with a class of checkbox. The class, meaning the period, so the class is checkbox, and on there we want to trigger what? A click event. And we can write code so that we associate with that click event, so as you click them, all right, something happens, whatever it is you want to have happen. And you can be much more precise than that, and they give you some examples. This example is dumb. Sorry, they play with cards, and you can do different stuff with the different suits of cards, and that I just thought it was a dumb example. What is nice about it is that's basically straight jQuery, just about. All right. Custom events are next, and we're on the bottom or middle of page 262. And as it says, an extremely powerful aspect of both JavaScript and jQuery is the capability to add custom events. So again, that's something for which there isn't something pre-built for you. So it says they enable you to extend the events that can be added to elements. You can basically have something happen that wouldn't have previously happened. All right. And when you look in here, it says adding a custom event to JavaScript is similar to triggering an event in that you create a custom event object and then initialize it. What they're doing right here is they literally are creating, it's about as close as you can to writing object-oriented JavaScript right there. And actually, when we create that game next week, we're going to write it in object-oriented JavaScript. If you remember the thing I showed you the other day with Bernie Sanders on it and the different Hillary Clintons that were falling down on it, all right, we're going to have a Bernie object, and we're going to have an array of Hillary objects. All right. So again, you can add custom events both in JavaScript and in jQuery. As you can see here, again, a little bit less code between the JavaScript and the jQuery. Finally, the last thing that's discussed in the chapter, and we're going to take a break in just a minute, starting on the bottom of 263 and going on to 264, are callbacks. If you've never heard of a callback before, with a lot of the different jQuery methods, they take two parameters. The first parameter is whatever it is you want to do, and the second parameter is almost always optional. It's a callback. And what you usually put in there is a function. That function will run as soon as whatever method you called completes. And it can be something as simple as, when it completes, I might want an alert box to pop up to say that I'm done with whatever it is I'm working with. All right, and the true last thing in here is using deferred objects. All right, so it says JavaScript provides a way to implement callbacks in a different way. A deferred object is an object that contains a set of functions that can be run later. Okay? What they're saying here is, I'm going to create a bunch of stuff that's deferred, and I'm going to put it in my routine. When my routine gets finished running, then run everything that's been tagged as being deferred. So don't run it until it's the successful conclusion of whatever it is I'm working with. All right? Long chapter, not a fun chapter. All right, not fun really to listen to, not that fun to lecture on either. All right, 3:48, let's try to come back and make it a couple minutes after 4, make it 5 after 4. All right.